you can tell us how was your week has been, as I try figure out why I can't find the scripts and I've sent them in.
Week has been good.
Yeah.
It's been busy. But busy is good. I try to, when things are really busy, again, remind myself that I'm lucky. How lucky am I to be busy? Things are crazy.
Having that problem.
But also, I saw there's a guy, Shannon Sharp. He has a podcast for whatever. Anyway, he's a very interesting character.
Yeah.
But one of the things he says is, you prayed for God to set this table.
Mm-hmm.
So you better damn eat what he has set for you now. You better eat what's on this table, because you've been praying for these things. Now God has given you, so it's now time to actually deliver. So yeah, so even if things are thick, things are really busy.
Yeah,
this is what we prayed for. So let's keep at it. Let's keep pushing forward.
Yeah,
even when scripts disappear at the last minute.
I know, technology. I'm telling you, man. I now respect you printing.
You see, piece of paper will never disappoint.
It would never disappoint, but I'm about to find them. Let me just forward them here again.
You want to...
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Full Scale Podcast. We hope that you've interacted with our previous episodes and you've found value in them. We look forward to getting your feedback, even as you continue to engage with the content therein. So in this episode, which is a first of a series of 2 episodes, we shall be discussing corporate governance, what it means, why it's important, key roles in corporate governance, principles of corporate governance, and the emerging trends in corporate governance. The episode will be an introduction to corporate governance and its importance for startups, growing businesses, as well as established business. So, Adrian, maybe you could start us off by letting us know what is corporate governance? What is it defined to be? What is it really?
Sure. I think that's always a good place to start when we're talking about such a big topic, is what is it? So you always have a thing you do where you look at actual textbook definitions. So we'll start with a couple of definitions. The first one here is from Sir Adrian Cadbury, who was a famous English businessman, chairman of Cadbury Schweppes for over 24 years. So he's a person who, presumably knows what he's talking about when it comes to corporate governance. And he defined it as the system by which corporations are directed, controlled, and held accountable. So a system, a mechanism, a framework by which corporations, which we've talked about many times on this podcast, are directed. How do you direct them? How do you decide what they're going to do? How do you move them in that direction? How do you control them? And how do you hold them accountable? How do you determine what's supposed to be done? What happens if it's not done the way it's supposed to be done? That type of framework, that's what corporate governance is. Another definition is, this is from the Corporate Governance Institute in the UK, which says corporate governance is a set of rules, practices, and processes. So rules, practices, and processes used to direct and control an organization. So very similar, right? Having a set framework of ways that you determine how things are supposed to be done, rules of the road, standards, practices, policies, processes to direct and control an organization. So this is a bit broader. It's saying an organization, but we're thinking about it from the perspective of a corporation specifically. And one final one here from the Chartered Governance Institute in the UK is corporate governance refers to the way in which companies are governed and to what purpose, which I think is a really cool one, right? So how are they governed and what's the purpose, right? What's the actual goal and how are you managing them to achieve that goal? So it identifies who has power and accountability, who makes decisions. It's in essence a toolkit that enables management and the board to deal effectively with challenges of running a company. So I'm assuming, a lot of our viewers, I'm assuming, are people who run companies who face challenges on a day-to-day basis. And they would want to know, how do I overcome those challenges? How do I know how to deal with them on a day-to-day basis? How do I determine the decision-making process? Right? And all of that is encompassed within corporate governance. So that's just a general idea. So it's rules, practices, policies, processes to govern, hold people accountable, have fairness and transparency in an organization, and its relationship with its stakeholders, which I think we're going to break that down as we go. But that's just to understand what we're talking about in today's episode. Tim, maybe we can go into the pillars and principles of good corporate governance. So, we've talked about, so corporate governance is the way that you go about running the organization and the rules and the principles. But if you're talking about good corporate governance, what's the best practice? What are the principles or pillars or the things that we look for in terms of good corporate governance?
Yeah. Even before we go to the principles and pillars of corporate governance, one point I also wanted to add on in the definition you provided.
Yeah.
And I think the one from the Chartered Governance Institute of the UK and Ireland should be the classic definition, because it's very broad. It includes purpose, but then we probably would need to ask ourselves why is it important? What is the importance of corporate governance? And one of them is that it enhances credibility, investor confidence, and long-term sustainability, which is crucial for any business that wants to make an impact or wants to be responsible or remain sustainable, even in terms of fundraising and other endeavors that the business undertakes. Now, on to the principles and pillars of corporate governance. So one thing that you realize is various authorities tend to have different variations of the fundamental principles and pillars of corporate governance. But in essence, they are all the same. To just give an example, the Corporate Governance Institute identifies 5 principles of corporate governance, which are responsibility, accountability, awareness, impartiality, and transparency. And we will discuss what this means just in a few minutes. Now, you can contrast or compare that with University of Lincoln in the United Kingdom, which lists accountability, transparency, fairness, and responsibility as the principles of corporate governance. Now, the only difference from what the Corporate Governance Institute sets as the 5 principles or pillars of corporate governance is inclusion of awareness, because impartiality is equally fairness, really. The principles and pillars are not any different. They could have different names from different materials. When you read different materials, you could find that they're given different names or descriptions, but by and large, they refer to the same things. And we can discuss the 8 or so foremost pillars or principles of corporate governance. So one of them is transparency. And this is basically ensuring open communication and timely and accurate disclosure of all material matters relating to the business, including financial situation, performance, ownership, and the corporate governance structures. So, such that any stakeholder, both shareholders, stakeholders involved in that particular business, have a clear understanding of what the business is about. And there's no opaqueness as to what the business is about. What is it? Shareholders should be able to know the financial statement, the situation of the business. Investors as well should be able to know the financial situation as well as performance.
Yeah, even employees, right?
Even employees, exactly, so that they know whether to bet their future with the business or, what it means to them. And the communication not only needs to be open, but it needs to be timely.
Yeah,
there's no need to provide financial information a year too late. Yeah. It's not useful in terms of making decisions for the stakeholders involved. The second one is accountability, which basically refers to defining of roles and responsibilities within the company.
Okay.
Such that there's a clarity on who's expected to do what. And that ideally, when there's clarity on who is supposed to do what and when, then there's a sense of accountability. Somebody can be held accountable if it's not done, or somebody can be reminded of what needs to be done. So this can be done in 2 levels, where the management is accountable to the board. And of course, when management is accountable to the board, it also means other employees and staff, that are managed by the management team are accountable to the management, and then the management is accountable to the board. Then the board is accountable to the shareholders as well as other stakeholders. So you could have those 2 levels of accountability.
Yeah. And I think, just sorry to interrupt, we see
No
this play
worries.
out a lot where when something goes wrong,
Mhm.
people ask for the CEO to be fired or something, like, because we're looking for some sort of accountability. Someone, a head has to roll so that we know that someone is taking the fall and is being held accountable for this thing. So you end up seeing that the board says we'll have to remove the CEO, or sometimes even people in the board are removed and are replaced. Yeah.
Indeed. I mean, the CEO is the chief executive officer, but he's
Yeah.
equally the chief accounting officer of that business. So if it fails, if something is not working, then I mean, his head is usually the first.
Yeah.
And most times, the board is equally not spared.
Yeah.
They almost go together because the problem is shared.
Yeah.
The sense of accountability to the respective shareholders involves all of them. The other one is fairness, which some sources would also refer to as impartiality, which is treating all shareholders and stakeholders equitably. The rights of shareholders, whether minority or majority, need to be protected. Their right to access information, right to know how the business is doing, needs to be enhanced and protected. If, for example, you own 1% of the shares in, let's just pick an example, a local example like Safaricom, you have an equal right to be informed of how the business is doing as that shareholder who perhaps holds 50%.
Yeah.
So your rights and as a member need to be protected with the same fairness and equity as that of a significant shareholder.
Yeah. Or if they're holding shareholder meetings, but they don't invite you because you're a minority shareholder, that type of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Shareholder meetings are held. You see notices at GMs were held.
Yeah.
Basically annual general meetings, but you have no idea. Nobody invited you. Nobody notified you.
Yeah.
Then the same way, stakeholders, of course, you have to also treat all stakeholders with a sense of fairness and create a mechanism that enables you to redress violations that exist, violations of the rights of every stakeholder within the business. Then we have another principle, which is responsibility. And this is very important, of course, especially for modern businesses, which is where you have ethical behavior and adherence to laws and regulations. Globally and in many other, and even locally in Kenya, regulators have grown ability to bite more and more, and as the business environment evolves. And I actually remember a statement that this is attributable to Teddy from his speech the other day.
Yeah. Shout out Teddy.
Yeah, shout out Teddy.
Haba Capital.
Where he said regulatory risk is extremely expensive. If you're not complying, if you're taking risks, at least you're taking uninformed risks. They could be very expensive in terms of your business. So this principle on ethical behavior and adhering to the local laws or the applicable laws and regulations is extremely important for a business. Then we have the other principle of independence and impartiality. So this requires you to have procedures and structures in place to minimize or completely avoid conflicts of interest, such that there needs to be independent directors and advisors, free from any influence of others. Or rather, the board should be able, every person who has a seat in the board should be able to bring to fore their skills, their mind, their understanding of the business, without all of you singing the same chorus.
Agreed.
Everybody is independent in how they review the business and how they see it.
Yes, and are making decisions based on what's best for the business or the stakeholders.
Exactly.
So decisions are made at an arm's length as opposed to classic conflict of interest. I'm on the board of a company and we're looking for a supplier, and I just so happen to have a company that supplies that thing on the side, and I say, oh, this is the best company to supply us.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, maybe the pricing is not right. Maybe they don't even have the right type of service or the right type of goods. So making decisions that are actually best for the company and are completely free of conflict, as opposed to doing what's good for one or two interests.
Exactly. I couldn't have even put it any better. Or even in having a cousin of mine, and I talk to them, I tell them that you can supply.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah. Then we have the other principle, which is efficiency. So resources of a business have to be managed for optimal benefits. The business needs to be efficient in how it utilizes and how it deploys resources for the business. such that there's efficiency and there's little wastefulness.
Mm.
And this is equally important in terms of conserving natural resources,
Yeah.
Especially if these are involved in how you conduct your business. And even if they're not natural resources anyway, time is a very important resource we all have. So the resources of the business need to be managed for optimal benefits. And then to add two more principles to discuss, one is participation, which requires stakeholders of the business. This could be employees, the general public, suppliers, financiers, and others.
Yeah.
Should be given an opportunity to participate in solving the problems of the organization by giving opinions or voting within the established structure. Of course, a creditor has no business voting at a general meeting, meeting of shareholders, or shareholders have no business voting at the board level.
Correct.
But unless they are both director shareholder.
Yes.
But ideally, a sense of participation should be enhanced in the business. And it's good because the more diversity you have in terms of decision making, of course, within a structure, because you could end up having too many people trying to make decisions such that no decision is ever made. But within proper structure, and there should be a level of participation.
Yeah, you've hit on many really cool points there in terms of participation, different stakeholders, involving people, having a structure within which you're making the decisions. But just on stakeholders, because we're using that word several times, but and I think you've already kind of explained it, but it's really anyone who has an interest or is somehow affected by this company, right? So they have a stake in it, right? So you are a stakeholder. So it could be the people in the organization, employees, the board, the shareholders, but it could also be consumers. So I have a stake in making sure that this toothpaste I'm going to buy is good for me, right? So make sure that you guys are doing things internally to make sure that this is a healthy product and it's not going to kill me as a user.
Indeed.
Right? The production, the delivery people, the logistics, everyone that's around that supply chain is somehow involved and they have a stake in it. So the corporate governance needs to take into consideration all of their views to some extent, right? And within a proper structure, which I think we'll talk more about as well.
Absolutely. And that's a very good definition of who is a stakeholder. I mean, we could be using a word and maybe our audience is wondering, what do you mean by a stakeholder? Indeed, that's what it means.
Okay.
So the final principle that we're going to discuss is predictability. This refers to the business having clear policies, rules and regulations, setting out how things should be done. There is no uncertainties. And some of these policies you're required to have by law. And good example is human resource policy, or a human resource manual that sets out how you go about applying for leave days, how many leave days you have, what to do if how to hand over, who to report to, such that there's no confusion. Others could be, anti-money laundering policies that help you comply with money laundering regulations and laws. And there are many more policies that your business would be expected to have, including sexual harassment policies. So the business needs to have a clear set of policies and rules and regulations that everybody who is a member or who participates in the business knows their role. It's clearly known in advance what they're required to do and what to do in case of an incident. If there is an AML, an anti-money laundering violation, what do you do? Do you just see it and say, "Oh my God, I'm gone"? What are you supposed to do?
Who are you supposed to report to? Exactly. What's the process?
And how do you get protected from any backlash that can happen? If there's an instance of corruption or such things.
So if you're a whistleblower.
Exactly.
Okay.
So those are by and large the principles of or the pillars of corporate governance. Basically, if you tick boxes in all this, then you're already doing very well in terms of corporate governance for your business.
Okay.
So perhaps we could go to the next step. And Adrian, we'll be glad if you could let us know. We've discussed the principles of corporate governance, but what are the benefits of good corporate governance?
Sure, happy to. And I think you already alluded to some of these right at the top of the episode. Benefits of good corporate governance. We've talked about what corporate governance is, what good corporate governance, the principles of that underpinning good corporate governance are. Now, the benefits. And I think it's pretty easy to see the benefits once you fully understand the pillars, right? So you're talking about a place where, let's imagine a workplace, right? Things are predictable. You know what's supposed to happen when. From the moment you walk into the door, you know the policies, you know the standards. whether the boss is around or not, you know what's supposed to be happening. People are held accountable. There's ethical behavior. Resources are used efficiently. Sort of all the things you've talked about. If you can imagine that workplace and you contrast it with a place where if the boss is not there, everyone's acting completely differently, or maybe even the boss, him or herself, is the one who sets the tone. That's very unethical. There's lack of integrity. There's no accountability. If I don't do my job today, it doesn't really matter. No one's going to hold me accountable. It's completely unpredictable. It's unstructured. There are no policies as to how to conduct yourself. If you look at those two workplaces, you can quickly see that the benefits to the quote unquote good place, right? The one that we've talked, the first one, is that one, there's going to be enhanced corporate reputation and trust. So within the institution, people are going to trust what's happening. There's going to be a lot of ability to look one another in the face and say, I understand my job, I understand your job, and I know that if we do what we're supposed to do, we're going to get things done the right way. So there's a culture of trust. There's a good reputation internally as well as externally. You can imagine the media and the general public will look favorably upon a place that has better corporate governance, and that you know who is holding people accountable internally and there's responsibility, as opposed to a place where there's no corporate governance or poor corporate governance, which could get slammed in the media. If you're a publicly traded company, your stock price will be affected. If you're a private institution, you're a startup trying to raise capital, an investor comes in and they want to invest in your company and they see poor corporate governance, that's going to have a cost. It could be that they're not going to invest in your company, or that they want you to do a lot of work before they can invest. So that's a cost in terms of your time. Or they could try to, their rates might be worse, right? If you're getting debt, that interest rate is going to be way higher, I would think, than someone who has a really good corporate governance and they have predictable systems internally. So it sort of affects you. Like if you think about, I have a product or a service that I'm delivering as a startup or as a business, that's all well and good. But how are you delivering it? And if you're not delivering it in a way that comports with good corporate governance, it takes a toll on you as a business. So there's the reputation and trust. Financial performance, surely. If people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, then risks are going to be well managed. We'll know when there's something going on in the market. We understand how to deal with it. We have a way of making decisions. We take into consideration people's thoughts. We talk to stakeholders. We involve people in the process, bring the employees along so they contribute and feel like they're part of the decision making and the process. There's also efficiency in the operations, right? So if on Monday through Friday, we know person A hands off to person B to person C, we know, and that operation, everything is fluid. We move in a fluid manner. But if you don't know what's going to happen on any given day, you could show up and person A didn't hand off to person B. Now you're wondering, when will I hand off to person C? Then it takes 3 weeks to do something that could have taken 1 week, right? That's, again, just how you're managing yourselves and how you're running the entity internally. Access to capital, which I think we've already sort of talked about, right? If you want to attract investors, top-tier investors who are going to give you more than just capital and give you all these other structures that will help your business, they typically want good corporate governance. They want to see that you have a board, your board is having meetings, there's decision-making, there's processes, standards. I mean, we've already sort of talked about all of this stuff.
Yeah, of course. Your board has meetings and there's clear documentation of those minutes. Decisions are not made on WhatsApp.
We've talked about
exactly
that a lot.
where
Exactly.
And we see there's a lot. You'd be surprised how many businesses make decisions on WhatsApp. Let's do this. Yes, let's proceed.
Today, boss is entertained. Let's make different decisions. So that, access to that capital, getting good investors, lowering your risk. The next one, I guess I'd say, is compliance and legal benefits. Again, you've sort of touched on this. If you're a place that has good compliance, you watch what's happening in terms of the regulatory landscape, you're adhering to the laws, then you're less likely to have issues with the regulator. You're less likely to get penalized or to have litigation or other legal issues. And those are all things that are a big distraction from your business, right? If my business is to produce this thing, I want to be producing that thing from day one to the last day. I don't want to be in court dealing with legal battles and dealing with all these other things that are, sort of ancillary to my business. They're not the core thing that I'm supposed to be doing. So regulatory compliance, reduced risk of litigation, and also long-term sustainability. If you're running that company B that we talked about, where nothing's going right, there's no corporate governance whatsoever, the chances of that company being around 10, 20, 30 years from now are way less likely, right? And I think we'll talk about an example of a company that had poor corporate governance at the tail end of this episode. And you see how even if you've been sustainable for so long, the moment you lose the corporate governance, even if your product is really good, even if your service is A grade, everything starts to fall apart and you're not going to be as sustainable in the long run because you don't have a clear strategic direction. There are no long-term goals aligned with the vision and the values of the company and of the leadership. And you're not having sustainable business practices to keep going as a business.
Yep.
Only other ones that touch on are, there's better decision-making. You're making better you have a better decision-making process. Odds are you're probably going to make better decisions in the long run.
Absolutely.
You have better crisis management. You have ways of dealing with things as and when they happen. Nothing's, the business world is unpredictable. Anything can change. COVID comes in and you have policies and ways to deal with things. It's easier to manage that than we have no idea what to do if there's ever a big issue like this or a destabilizing force in the market.
Indeed.
Right. And also just another one is just attracting and retaining top talent, right? I imagine viewers and listeners who heard the description of company A, you'd much rather work for company A, right? Even if company B is paying you more money, but I come in and everything's completely all over the place and my mental health and everything else I think there's a cost there that's way more than the money that I'm ever going to make from that place. So, those are the ones I touch on. I think that there are more that you can always extrapolate based on what the principles are that we've articulated.
Indeed.
But I would focus on those. And if you're a business leader or you're someone who's working in a business or someone who's in any way affected by businesses, these are things that you would want to see in the businesses that you're working with.
Absolutely. And you see, the thing is, it could be a headache to get the corporate governance right, getting the policies done right, identifying how many policies you need to have. First of all, the ones you must have by law, and which ones, the policies that are also good practice to have.
Yeah.
It could be involving and it could be, an involving process. And maybe it could involve a cost to you in terms of getting them done right. But the headache they save you in terms of running the business, maybe managing a crisis, managing a risk, as well as ensuring sustainability, such that the chief accounting officer, the CEO of that particular business, is not always having a headache, having to decide as you go on every single thing, or somebody shouted at the other on ground floor and you sit perhaps on 7th floor. You don't even know what exactly happens on ground floor, but now it becomes your problem. If there are structures and policies, it just makes everybody's business, participation in that business much easier and enhances sustainability because everybody who comes in knows where they're supposed to plug in. And like we've mentioned, key among them, the issues of good corporate governance is accountability. Then you can hold them accountable if they, we know who locks the door, who opens it, who keeps the keys. It's not the case of I left him here, he was supposed to lock,
So and so said they would do it.
They will so do it.
There's a way to do it.
Exactly.
So I think doing it now to save yourself the headaches in the long run, right?
Extremely important.
A stitch in time saves 9, right?
Exactly.
So you do it now, it will be a headache, but what you're saving in the long-term effort and headache is well worth it. So I think that's sort of where I'll wrap on just the benefits of good corporate governance. And also, if you're wondering, you're listening to this and you're watching and you're thinking, okay, so you've told us all these things, but how do we do these in a business on a day-to-day? That's what the next episode will be about, right? Practical step-by-step ways that you can incorporate good corporate governance in your startup, in your business on a day-to-day basis. So stay tuned and look out for that one next time. Also, just to pause and say, this is not legal advice.
It is
We're giving you things that we've seen in the market, things that work, our personal experiences based on our work experience. But this is not legal advice. Don't take this and think that it's legal advice and run with it. Every situation is unique. Talk to your legal advisors, talk to Mukiti advocates, talk to whoever you trust as your legal advisor to get the right legal advice. But this podcast is not legal advice.
Exactly. So, especially talk to Mukiti advocates.
So on that, I'll now pivot to who are the key players? What are the key roles in corporate governance? So we've talked about what it is, what the pillars are, what the benefits of doing it right are. But so who are the key people or the key roles involved in good corporate governance? Could you walk us through that, Tim?
Yes, happy to. So the key organs or participants in ensuring good corporate governance are in 3 levels.
Okay.
So the first one is the board of directors, and we'll just touch a bit on that. The second one is the executive management. And the third one is the shareholders. Those, of course, employees and other stakeholders could have some input. But if any of this is failing in their role in corporate governance, it doesn't even begin to pick up. So these ones are extremely crucial in corporate governance. And that's why we are saying key roles in corporate governance. These are extremely key to the entire corporate governance structure. So the board of director has a role to oversight the management, determine the strategic direction of the business, and protect the shareholders' interest.
Okay.
So, and how does the structure of a good board of directors need to look like? It needs to have competent and independent directors, and the board should be as diverse as possible, such that you're bringing skill sets that are useful to the business. You cannot just have a board of directors who are all accountants, or you have a board of directors who are all lawyers.
Yeah,
you're missing something. Maybe because the business will need to make financial decisions. The lawyers, they might know a few things, but they're incapacitated. There's a limit to how much you can proceed on the financial decisions. You can just have a board of human resource officers, professionals. So you need to have a competent and diverse board made up of independent directors. To even add on that, the Kenyan Companies Act sets out 7 duties of directors of a company, which are essential and complementary to the roles of directors in corporate governance. And these are: directors have a duty to act within their powers. They have a duty to promote. The second one is they have a duty to promote the company's success. Thirdly, they have a duty to exercise independent judgment.
Okay.
The fourth one is that they have a duty to exercise reasonable skill, care, and diligence. The fifth is that they have a duty to avoid conflict of interest. And some of this we have already touched them among the pillars and principles of good corporate governance. The sixth one is they have a duty not to accept benefit from third parties, to the expense of the company.
Yeah.
And the seventh is that they have a duty to disclose any interest in a proposed transaction or an arrangement, which also it builds up to the conflict of interest. Yes. So, corporate governance has almost 2 levels to it. There's a bare minimum that is required by law that you have to comply with. Just as we've mentioned, there are policies that you must have under the law. But there are others that are good, good practice, best practice for your business. Now, already the Companies Act sets out specific ways the board must behave. And in behaving in this manner, they contribute to their role and duty in terms of undertaking their corporate governance responsibilities seriously and effectively. And even to add on that, this is at the very basic. Yeah. When you go now to a company that is listed, that is regulated by the Capital Markets Authority, there is more compliance requirements. When you go to a board of directors for business that is licensed by the Central Bank of Kenya, you have, you have issues like being fit and proper. Yeah. It's not just that you have skilled; you need to be fit and proper, and there's a criteria for that. So there are specific set requirements that you have to. And you need to take care as a board, which not only would be required under the law of the particular business that you undertake in, the regulatory framework, but equally also build into your responsibility in terms of corporate governance. And then if you tie that with best practice, then you already start to build a sustainable business that is able to withstand shocks.
Awesome. And just to pick on one thing, I think that's a really good way to describe the board and the things that they should aspire to do for a company, whether it's by law or just going above and beyond best practice. But the only thing I want to touch on there is you mentioned having independent directors. So I think we've mentioned by law, at least in Kenya, you need to have independence in the way that you're thinking. So in the terms of, in the sense that I am on this board, I may be a shareholder, but the decisions I'm going to make are independent. I'm sitting individually and thinking, is this the best thing for this business, right? So without listening to my other directors or being influenced by other, third parties, I'm thinking about what's best for this business, not what's best for maybe someone else that I know or some other conflict of interest. Yeah. But then there's also having independent directors, capital I. And those are now people who they're not shareholders. They're not related to anyone else in the company or anyone on the board. They don't have any, big material ties to the company. So they can properly, I may be a director and I'm trying to think independently, but I'm also a shareholder and have a lot of money in this business. So I'm just thinking about what's going to make us the most money. But a true independent director who has no stake in the business, no material stake, no familial ties, that person can actually sit and say, you know what? despite what you're all saying, I'm letting you know that this is the wrong decision for this reason.
Exactly.
Right? And they may be overruled or something, but having that voice of independence and reason is also very critical for that board composition.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that still builds on to the concept of diversity.
Correct.
Independence and diversity. I think those go together.
Yeah.
Because if you have somebody who is independent and they equally have a different mindset, sort of, they're not tied to the business term of shareholding.
Yeah.
They can easily tell you that this is a bad decision that you're taking, and this is how I see it, even when it looks very tempting for shareholders because you want to maximize profits.
Yeah.
Or maximize the return. So to touch on the other two, which is one is executive management. They have a role in terms of implementing policies and running day-to-day operations and reporting to the board.
Okay.
The board, of course, will have meetings occasionally. So they're not involved into the day-to-day, running of the business, who does what, enforcing the policies. That will be the role of the executive management. So even if you have very good policies, but the executive management is failing, then your corporate governance structure is already failing.
Exactly.
Because the policies will sleep. People will not do what they're required. Problems will not be detected in good times. There will be no mitigating measures, and then you'll have a challenge. So the executive management is equally crucial in terms of ensuring good corporate governance.
And those executive management, those are the terms you always hear. Your CEO, CFO, Chief Financial Officer, Chief Technology Officer. There are many, actually. There are more that keep coming up.
Chief Human Resource Officer.
Chief Legal Officer.
Exactly.
Those are the people who are right at the top of each of those verticals, right? Legal, accounting, human resource, whatever it is, there's a person right at the top. And then, of course, there's
internal
the CEO.
Audit.
Who sits at the top of all of that and sets the vision for, what's going to happen in the company.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Basically, we can call them the senior management.
Yes. Or C-suite. They have different names
exactly.
for them.
Yeah, absolutely. The other one is shareholders.
Okay.
This third category now. We've said there are three, which is the board, the executive management, and the shareholders.
Correct.
So the shareholders, of course, they have a responsibility in terms of voting on key issues, such as electing the board, the voting for the auditors, receiving dividends, staying informed on the developments relating to the company.
Yeah.
So the shareholders equally have a duty. If you have aloof shareholders who don't care or can be bothered, then the corporate governance is already starting to fail on one side, because they need to hold the board of directors, to account.
Yeah.
They need to keep them accountable, get reports, understand how the business is doing, ask particular questions, not to be passive, because
show
they're
up
crucial.
for the meetings.
Exactly, show up for the meetings, make contributions, and all that. So they need, shareholders also need to take their rights and responsibilities seriously. And this is especially for businesses that have many shareholders. If you have only two shareholders, that can be easy.
Yeah.
The temptation to make decisions on WhatsApp is higher. But if you have a business that has 1,000 shareholders, you could have a good number of shareholders who can be bothered.
Yeah.
But that's not good for the business, because they need to hold the board of management accountable. They need to make decisions to vote for the right board of directors.
Yeah.
They need to make decisions to vote for the right auditors for the business.
They shouldn't just focus on their responsibility for receiving dividends.
Exactly.
Right? Don't just focus on, I need to get my dividend. That's it.
Money?
I don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So Adrian, just perhaps you could take us through the emerging trends, as well as ethics, integrity, and leadership in governance.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. So there are a few things that, corporate governance has existed for a long time, but there are certain things that are emerging more recently as things that are real focal points for how you're doing your corporate governance. Two of these that I'll hit on that I think are really crucial are, one, there's an increased focus on ESG. That's environmental, social, and governance. So there's a global shift towards integrating ESG within your corporate governance, right? So we've already talked about how you go about running your company and how you make decisions and all of that. But do you also consider the environment and the society in the way that you're governing your company? So it may be that we're producing, let's say we're an oil company, right? Oil is what we deal with, this is what we sell, and we're trying to maximize value for our shareholders, right? That's the bottom line. But then you now introduce other factors like, okay, how are you going about this? Is your product the best thing for the environment? What are the long-term effects on where you are drilling, where you're getting this product, how you're supplying it to people down the value chain. That now becomes what they call the triple or even double or even triple bottom line, right? What are the other things that you're thinking about beyond profit?
Yeah.
About how you're affecting the world and the citizens and the people around you. So there's a growing recognition that sustainable and ethical business practices are not just beneficial for the way that you're running a company, but essential almost really for the long-term success and risk management. So investors are demanding more on ESG. They want reporting on ESG. What are you doing for the environment, for the society? How are you making sure that the products you're producing are doing it in a way that is the least cost to the environment or to the society?
Mm-hmm.
Regulators are also introducing ESG standards that you need to meet as a company. So that goes back into the legal and compliance. And even consumers, right? So all the stakeholders, even consumers are saying, I'm going to buy this milk carton because I know that it's been sustainably produced, or it's organic, or there's some way that it's been done that's better for the environment, as opposed to this other one, which they've not indicated that they care about the environment. So people are more and more taking note and are thinking about the environment and about beyond themselves or the profit when they come to consuming products or the cost of the product. So it's becoming more important for various stakeholders. So that means it's also becoming important for the companies. So we'll talk more about how you can incorporate ESG in the next episode. But it again comes down to similar things, right? Diversity in the board, maybe having ESG experience there, ESG being part of your strategy, trying to have reporting on ESG. So if you're not tracking it, you're probably not doing it, right? So if you track it, you can actually start to have it top of mind and make it core to your strategy as a business. The other one is diversity and inclusion on boards, which we've already talked about. And it's just, I guess the point being, and it's been statistically proven or found that diversity drives better decision making. So I mean, I have a whole like decision quality. Diverse teams are 87% more effective at making decisions. Inclusive processes make decisions twice as fast. Diverse management teams lead to 19% higher revenue, 35% more productivity in inclusive teams. It's just, I mean, you can look at all these statistics up, and the research tends to back it up that if you have broader, different schools of thought when you're dealing with any problem or you're making decisions, you tend to make better decisions, or you tend to have better outcomes because you're considering things that you haven't even thought about. So Tim and I sitting here making all the decisions for the company, we don't even know what we don't know, right? But if we bring a third person to the table, he or she might say, well, actually, you haven't considered this thing, and say, wow, we had not thought about that at all. So the more differentiation you have, that could be gender, backgrounds, perspective, work experiences, it all adds to better decision making, which is one of the core components really of corporate governance.
Indeed.
So, and then the last one I'll talk about is ethics and integrity, which is just, you can have all the good corporate governance in the world. You can have all the policies, procedures, steps, frameworks, whatever, internally. But if you don't have sound ethical behavior and integrity, particularly at the top, from the very first person at the top, then it's almost all a waste, right?
Indeed.
Good corporate governance is really reliant, and it starts with good ethical behavior. So if you're starting a business, you are employee number one. You should start with that in mind. Behave ethically and in the way that you want everyone to act down the line, because then by the time you hire employee number 2 and even employee number 1,000, they're all going to be following the tone that you've already set from the top. So
Indeed.
If you don't have that ethical integrity and leadership right at the top, it's everything else falls away. So that's the only other thing I'd touch on. So it's good to set the tone right from the top. Maybe, Tim, you could close us out by, I mean, we've talked about the importance of good corporate governance, how it can benefit you, but people really want to know how does this play out in real time, right? So an example is always the best way, I think, to teach things. So if you could give us an example of a company or a situation where there's been poor corporate governance and how that played out, and perhaps how could better corporate governance have maybe assuaged or like relieved or saved that situation or prevented it from having happened?
Indeed. The truth is there is poor corporate governance has cost many businesses and many visions. And some of them have fallen post the founders. You know, when the business is already stabilized, is strong, but because the structures were not good, then you start to have issues. And they say, you know, it's a cliche statement, but indeed, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. So perhaps what we have here is examples of bigger ones that failed, but I'm sure even smaller businesses tend to fail frequently when there's poor corporate governance. So I'll just touch on two or three examples quickly. One of them is Enron. This was big around early 2000s.
Okay.
So Enron was in the energy sector. It was a giant adored by Wall Street as a true innovator. In August 2000 of the year 2000, just at the turn of the millennium, they had a market share of $70 billion.
Wow.
And they were outperforming the SP 500 by over 200%. 15 months later, the company was bankrupt. Now, an investigation by the US Securities Exchange Commission, SEC, revealed that Enron was concealing billions of dollars in liabilities and toxic assets using non-standard accounting and special purpose vehicles. So clearly you can see the board, number one, was failing.
Yep.
And the executive management was equally failing with them in terms of corporate governance. And maybe also this tied to the shareholder level of the requirement to be vigilant and to know what is happening in their business. Now, the collapse of Enron was a big deal because it went with one of, at the moment you hear of the big four accounting firms, which is KPMG, PwC, Deloitte, and EY. At the turn of the millennium, we had the big five, and we had Arthur Andersen as the other one. And this scandal, particularly the Enron scandal, literally took out Arthur Andersen because they were involved, and their CPA license was revoked, and they were out of business. So you can already see how terrible, failing to practice good corporate governance. The cost of it, can be very expensive in terms of even a business could be non-existent anymore.
Correct. And so it sounds like they were not abiding by standard accounting practices. And then even the accounting firm that they hired to audit and make sure they were doing it correctly were somehow also not following the correct procedures. So both companies did not have proper corporate governance. They were not doing things the way that they were supposed to do it. Reporting failed. People were not being held accountable. And therefore, all of this sort of happened. So if only they had done it the right way, perhaps they'd still both be around.
Yes,
right?
yes. Perhaps Enron would still be around. Arthur Andersen would still be around. So that's that. You can see
Great
how
example.
expensive it is. Another one is, of course, the Lehman Brothers. And I think there's, I will not touch on the third one, but Lehman Brothers, the reason we're touching on it is because it was very important. It had a very important role that it played in the 2008 global financial crisis. That was actually very, very, had very extensive damaging effects around globally on the economy. And this firm was founded in the 1850s and filed bankruptcy in September 15, 2008 as the global financial crisis related, and its issues related to the subprime mortgage era that was unfolding. By 2007, Lehman Brothers had amassed a portfolio of mortgage-backed securities valued at $87 billion, 4 times the value of its shareholders' equity. To disguise some of its leverage, Lehman Brothers entered into agreements with banks in Cayman Islands that effectively transferred some of its firm's liabilities, agreeing to repurchase them later. You can already now look, the balance sheet is starting to look better because you've transferred the liabilities and you're saying that you'll take them up on later. And some other things they were doing relating to the mortgage environment. So by manipulating the accounting standards to record these agreements and sales, the company obtained cash in the short run without recording any liabilities. Of course, Lehman Brothers, when this saga blew up, it had very damaging effects to literally every country across the globe. So those are some of the examples of bad corporate governance and what it can do to your business and the damaging effects. Doesn't contribute to global sustainability of what everybody's doing.
It doesn't just affect you.
Yes, it affects so many other people. And the bigger you are, the worse it gets. So
Correct.
the more important
the corporate governance. And even more important to start when you're small, so that by the time you're huge, you already have those systems in place.
It's in your character. It's in your DNA as you build. Yeah, so on to the more fun side of our podcast. Perhaps, Adrian, in a minute or so, you can tell us something interesting, an interesting thing for you of the week.
Sure. I think this is more fun, but I think even the first part was fun.
Yeah.
So Interesting thing of the week for me was I have several newsletters that I subscribe to. This one was from the Medium newsletter. They talked about outcome bias, which I think it really ties in well with this episode. So outcome bias being judging a past decision by its outcome instead of on the quality of the decision at the time it was made, given the information that was available at the time. Right. So the classic example is a test subject where they presented subjects with hypothetical situations, and they said, you have an example of a surgeon deciding whether or not to do a risky surgery on a patient. The surgery is known to have a probability of success. And then you present the subjects. You have subjects A and subjects B. You present them with a good outcome or a bad outcome. So the person lived and the surgery was successful, or the person died and the surgery was unsuccessful. Then they're asked, rate the quality of the surgeon's decisions before the operation happened. And overwhelmingly, the people who saw that the patient died in that hypothetical, they all say the decision was poor. It was a bad decision that the surgeon made to proceed with the surgery. But it's because they're factoring in the fact that the person died, which at the time the decision was made, that was not the case, right? We had this information. We knew that it's a probable success in terms of the surgery, the way it's been done in the past. Probably the surgeon was also well equipped and sort of well experienced in this type of surgery. So it's judging the quality of our decisions based on the outcome instead of the decision making. Also, in terms of startups, right? If you come up today and you have a really cool, innovative idea and you go out to execute on it, we could say that's really cool. That's a good idea and you're doing it the way you're supposed to. If the startup fails, people will say, that person made poor decisions. And it may not even be about the decision making. It might be other things that happen, as opposed to someone who does the exact same idea and it succeeds. So the point being, think about your decision making. I mean, at least one way to overcome this cognitive bias, which is outcome bias. Think about or focus on how you make decisions and not necessarily on the outcomes. This always happens to me in Fantasy Premier League. I make decisions before the deadline. I'm like, this is the players I want. And then I'm like, how could I do that? But it's the decisions that you made. Did you have all the information possible? Did you consider things that were available at the time? And did you make the best decision at the time? That's how you should look back at it, not, it turned out wrong and therefore it was a bad decision. And I think it dovetails well with corporate governance. Bad things might happen, but that might not be a reflection on the leadership. So they said one of the issues with this outcome bias is you could do away with really good leaders because you're looking at their decision making in hindsight and you're saying, they made a bad decision because the outcome was bad. But maybe they use actually good decision making processes to get there. So if you have good corporate governance, you're focusing on the way you're making decisions. Hopefully you make good decisions, but if they turn out poorly, make sure you look at how you made the decisions and judge yourself based on that, as opposed to the actual outcome. So yeah, that was my interesting thing of the week.
Wonderful. That's a profound lesson there, I think everybody can take it and pick a few lessons.
No matter what you're deciding in your life. Yeah.
Exactly.
I would still be an Arsenal fan even with outcome bias. Even knowing what I know now, at the time, seeing how Thierry Henry was playing, seeing how they were doing everything, I would still be an Arsenal fan. So yeah.
I think all Arsenal fans have already passed that test because it's been a long journey. So I don't think it's about outcomes anymore. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. What about you? You have something interesting for the week?
Yes. So for me, the interesting thing for the week was, and it's an event we both attended. We got to attend the annual investor summit for Harbour Capital.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we got invited. And what stood out for me, there are many things that stood out for me, but I'll mention one of them that stood out for me from that event. So Harbour Capital provides sort of working capital for businesses, especially when you have quality contracts, but you may not have the resources to deliver on that particular contract, and you're expected to be paid once the contract is finalized. Yeah. So you may need working capital, and maybe you're a business that is not asset heavy. So if you go to a bank, they're not your friend. What do we need what security will we perfect to give you capital? So they provide businesses with that form of capital. But for me, one thing that stood out was the gap in the market. The economy in the country is greatly, actually our driver of the economy in Kenya specifically is small and growing businesses, or what other people would prefer to call medium and small and medium sized businesses. Yeah. but they don't have sufficient access to capital.
Yeah.
And some of them die as they are waiting for the next payment. We have instances of, long creditor days. People don't get paid in a good time, and you can keep your lights on. So you have to close down, despite the fact that you're expecting a big payment coming, but it comes a little too late.
Yeah.
So I think they are plugging in an important space. And for me, was what my takeaway, among many others, was how it is important for as many stakeholders involved to find ways of supporting credible businesses that are small and growing to ensure that they have fewer problems and can be able to be sustainable, because they are drivers in the economy in terms of employment, in terms of GDP, and basically making the economy so much better. Yeah. So that's my interesting thing of the week.
Yeah, it was a great time. Really cool people, seeing who their investors are, who the clients are that they're serving. Yeah. And hopefully we'll have Teddy on the show one day so he can speak more about what they're doing. But yeah, phenomenal experience. I mean, that's us for the week. We've been talking about good corporate governance, what corporate governance is, what are the pillars that underpin that, how you go about, what good corporate governance looks like and the benefits of it, as well as some examples of poor corporate governance and some other emerging trends. That's basically us for the week. Next week, we'll be telling you more about practical step-by-step ways that you can actually implement good corporate governance in your business. But really, that's us for the week. Tune in for that one next week if you want to see more of this type of content. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share this with your friends and enemies alike. Look out for the weekly challenge on our social media this weekend to stand a chance to win a prize. And really, that's us. We continue to appreciate you for listening and viewing wherever you are. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Indeed. See you next week.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye.